The Warren-Matson Debate. Dr. Thomas B. Warren, Ph.D., is professor of the philosophy of religion and Christian apologetics at the Harding Graduate School in Memphis, Tennessee. Dr. Wallace I. Matson, Ph.D., is professor of philosophy at the University of California at Berkeley. This debate was held at the Curtis-Hixson Convention Hall in Tampa, Florida, on September the 11th through the 14th, 1978. We present the Warren-Matson Debate on the existence of God. The propositions for this debate are as follows. The first proposition reads, I know that God, that is, the God in the New Testament, who is to punish some individuals eternally in hell, does not exist. Dr. Wallace I. Matson is in the affirmative, and Dr. Thomas B. Warren is in the negative of this proposition. The second proposition reads, I know that God, that is, the God of the New Testament, who is to punish some individuals eternally in hell, does exist. Dr. Thomas B. Warren is in the affirmative, and Dr. Wallace I. Matson is in the negative of this proposition. This production was directed and videotaped by Dr. Rex A. Turner, Jr. and by Dr. Curtis A. Cates, administrators and professors of the Alabama Christian School of Religion, Montgomery, Alabama. This film has been copyrighted and reproduced by the National Christian Press, Incorporated. Any reproductions, use, or sale of this film without written permission from the authorized representative of the National Christian Press is strictly prohibited.
Mr. Matson, gentlemen moderators, ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad to be before you tonight for the last 20-minute speech of my part of this debate. There will remain from my part only the 5-minute rejoinder or summary of the discussion. As I listened to Dr. Matson, I could not help but be impressed by the fact of his spending 40 minutes tonight, his first 20-minute speech, the second, in a constant barrage of making assertions without any documentation or proof. I cannot imagine that a scholar of his stature would give a student even a passing grade on such an effort at research. Imagine a man of Dr. Matson's standard who documents statements with nothing more than scientists say. I would expect this level of scholarship, perhaps, and again I want to say this kindly, from fellows who sit around the courthouse square, but not from a man of his standing in such a great and prestigious university. Everything that he has had to say has been answered by my argument on the cardinal system. I have shown that there is simply no way that this could have evolved. You cannot live longer than 5 minutes without it. There is no way that Dr. Matson can explain it, no way any biologist or chemist or biochemist or paleontologist or archaeologist. I have written to these men He said last evening, no wonder they didn't bother to write because they're busy men. Dr. Matson, I didn't say they didn't write. Many of them did. But what I said was that not a single one of them gave an argument, just like you didn't. And a man can write a whole book on the evolution of life, and yet you look through it and find not one logical argument that shows this is the conclusion of this argument. Dr. Max Black of Cornell University, professor of logic, has in his book on logic called Critical Thinking a statement near the introduction, or near the beginning of it, in which he quotes from Josiah Stamp in pointing out the value of a logical presentation of an argument, for he says, 400 pages of crowded fact and argument may deceive the very elect, but to lay bare the bones of an argument in a three-line syllogism helps any and everybody to understand it. Dr. Matson has not done that. He now has let his time pass that I will have no opportunity to reply to what he says in his following speech, so he cannot offer new material. Therefore, I submit to you that everything he said about evolution has been answered by what I've said about life from non-life and human from non-human. He has not explained how life has come from non-living matter. He has not given the argument that shows how human beings have come from that which is not human. He has, in fact, admitted in answers to questions, not by birth, not by transformation. And his facetious remark a moment ago does not get rid of it. If he says, for instance, a woman was first on earth, you see he has the problem of saying that there was a woman that was once a woman on earth that was never a baby. Please tell us, Dr. Matson, how she got here. Or if, on the other hand, he says a human baby was on earth before a woman, he has the opportunity or the obligation of explaining how there was a human baby when there had never been a woman. Dr. Matson, that requires a miracle. And in fact, if you say a woman was first before a baby, you're exactly fitting the biblical record. The Bible gives the only record that makes any facts, namely that God formed man from the dust of the earth, breathed into his nostrils a breath of life, and man became a living soul. And he then took a rib from man's side, formed woman, and gave her unto him. You see, the first human pair came from that which was self-existent, that which had eternal life, and therefore could bestow life. God can bestow existence. You and I have existence. We can change things within nature. But God is the cause of nature. He can bestow existence. Existence was not bestowed upon him. And God bestowed existence upon us. And you can search for 100 million years and you'll never find anything different. And this man, neither he nor any of his colleagues have ever said anything to the contrary. Now, when I indicated that the proper purpose of us gathering here together as philosophers, I did not say that it was wrong for him to consider scientific data. But I indicated that he ought to recognize that what he's doing is not functioning as a scientist when he does it. When he tries to synthesize information from the various scientific disciplines, that's an effort to philosophize, and he's done a mighty poor job of doing it. Now, I want to turn to the last point of my affirmation of the fact that God is one. Now, he will have opportunity to reply to this, even though I won't have an opportunity to reply to what he says to it, except in my 5-minute rejoinder, because this is new material for me in the sense of a formulated argument. God is one. I approve God is self-existent, God is good, God is just, and now God is one. There is one and only one self-existent being. There cannot be more than one self-existent being because eternity, infinity, omnipresence, omnipotence, and so forth cannot apply to more than one such being. For example, suppose there were two omnipotent beings which could overcome or rule the other. Two such beings would limit and exclude each other and thus render the being of God impossible. Now let us note an argument. Now, I'm not just going to talk in general circles, give you a sort of a history of ideas about it. I'm going to give you a precisely stated argument, just as I did with Dr. Flew. Premise number one. If a contingent thing exists, and if the existence of a contingent being proves the existence of a necessary or non-contingent or a self-existent being, It is the very essence of God to exist. And if the attributes of a self-existent being necessarily follow from his self-existence, and if the fact that the attributes of a self-existent being necessarily follow from his self-existence implies there can be no more than one self-existent being, then God exists and is the one and only God who exists. Now, the second premise. That was a rather long, complicated premise, but it is precisely stated, and it fits in with the argument. The second premise. A contingent thing does exist. I'm contingent. Dr. Matson's contingent. All of you are contingent. There's no problem there. Third, the existence of a necessary, self-existent, non-contingent being. The attributes of a self-existent being necessarily follow from his self-existence. Fifth, the fact that the attributes of a self-existent being necessarily follow from his self-existence implies that there can be no more than one self-existent being. Now, the sixth premise is that all of these four preceding things that I've shown are true. I'll not take the time, I don't have the time to repeat each one of them. But having shown all of this information, you can surely see that all of it is true. And seventhly, God does exist and is the one and only God who does exist. Now, having said that, it shows that I have shown that God exists as the self-existent one. He is perfect in goodness, perfect in justice, and is the one and only God. God is conducive of good. He is the ultimate good. Atheism is conducive of evil. We see that in the fruits of communism, as exemplified in Cambodia and China. We see the fruits of atheism in our own nation, as it begins already to eat at the very moral fiber of our nation. You ought to be worried about your nation. You ought to be worried about its educational system, and so on. Now, I want to get into the book as a summation of what has happened so far as Dr. Matson's efforts are concerned. Chart number 4N to be followed by 4N1 and N2 if I can get to them. I believe this is one of the largest lists of blunders, inconsistencies, self-contradictions, and admissions of defeat in which I've ever been encountered in any opponent. These are Dr. Matson's blunders, and by that I mean his inconsistencies, self-admissions of contradictions and defeat and so on. While he was in the affirmative, he claimed, number one, that the burden of proof was on me and not on him. Secondly, he claimed that he did not need to know how life originated. Third, he claimed that he as an atheist did not need to know that matter is eternal. Fourth, he claimed that he did not need to know how human life originated, the how of it. Fifth, he admitted that the infinite God, good God, may exist. Sixth, he tried to distinguish between the good infinite God of the flu debate and the so-called, by him, evil infinite God of the Matson proposition. The truth is that no distinction exists. We were discussing the God of the Bible in both cases. Seventh, he claimed to know merely from the concept of God that God does not exist. Eighth, he claimed that God's punishing constitutes a contradiction, namely that the good God could not punish even for 1 minute, either in this life or in the world to come. Ninth, he admitted that punishment as retribution is just and even necessary, thus admitting that some punishment is retributive. That is, in admitting that one human being can punish another. Tenth, he claimed that pointless suffering is the evil which warrants the deduction that God does not exist. Question number 1, Monday night. Yet he himself cannot define pointless suffering. Thus, he cannot know that God does not exist by that line of reasoning. 11th, he admitted by implication from number 10 that the suffering inflicted by the Nazis upon the Jews could not, according to his position, be objectively morally wrong. 12th, he contradicted his position set out in number 11 by asserting true in question number 4 on Monday night that the Nazis were guilty of real objective moral wrong. 13th, he claimed that an omnipotent God could not punish him after death by saying that God, though omnipotent, could not reassemble and resurrect him. And I'll give attention to that in just a moment in more detail. 14th, he claimed that all the atheist has to do is to prove that God does not exist is to show problems in the theistic argument. This is nothing but agnosticism. It is not atheism, for atheists claim to know that God does not exist and the burden is on their shoulders to prove that he does not merely to make objections to the theistic position, which is what they almost always confine their efforts to doing. 15, he claimed that murder is wrong because it is merely unpleasant and tends to lead to unpleasantness. 16, he claims that happiness is doing your own thing. 17, he claimed that all atrocities perpetrated under the guise of Christianity correspond to New Testament Christianity. I want to call your attention again to the fact that Christianity, true Christianity, is the religion of biblical authority. It is those who practice, who obey the New Testament teaching, who become Christians. In obeying the New Testament plan of salvation that God adds to his church, and those who live in faithfulness to that teaching as Christians, that is Christianity. Those people do not perpetrate the kind of things that Dr. Matson has referred to. He claimed that Christianity is anti-Semitic. Note, in opening his speech, he admitted that he did not know much about the Bible, and that certainly constituted proof of it. The first Christians were Jews. And when the Jews cried out before Christ was crucified, "Let his blood be on us and on our children," those were not Christians. Christians did not begin till the first day of Pentecost following the resurrection of Christ. He claimed that foreknowledge, in the 19th place, implies predestination, and that the two imply determinism. And there is simply no such thing. If tomorrow at 1 o'clock I should eat a hamburger at a certain fast food place, today, right this moment, God knows that I will do it. But he does not make me do it by knowing it. He knows what I will freely do at that time. This point here is the old hack used by determinists. They ought to be completely total determinists, to be atheists, because they are nothing but matter in motion. And therefore, freedom is absolutely meaningless for one who holds the atheistic position, or it ought to be. They're inconsistent in holding that they are free men, and for him to even come here and debate to talk about persuading anybody is completely out of harmony with his own basic position. He claimed the philosophy of communism is not based on atheism. Of course, that's simply wrong. Marxist communism, I'm not talking about just somebody might say I'm a communist and maybe mean we ought to pool our goods together, but I'm talking about a Marxist communist. Marxist communism is based on atheism. It says that God is a figment of man's imagination and religion is the opium of the people, and so on. It's a strange thing to me to have to teach that to Dr. Matson. He claimed that a human being must have come from a non-human being, and he has absolutely no proof whatever. He's given no documentation for it at all, and he cannot do so. He claimed that a long period of time is the answer to the origin of human beings, but he's unable to tell the how of evolution. I have told him if he took 100 trillion years in time, you know, they like to say, given enough time, anything can happen. Well, if that's so, given enough time, then God may have come into existence. All right, thank you. But of course, they're not willing for that to happen. They want to pick out what they want to be possible to happen. He claimed that the law of excluded middle does not apply to human beings by imagining a third class, which is neither human nor non-human. He denied what he admitted in question 1 Tuesday night on the law of excluded middle. Now, the significance of that is that given Dr. Matson's position, we might have all of us march by him and ask him to classify us as either non-human, human, or neither human nor non-human, and it would be completely right for him to put us in the gas ovens as the Nazis if he can't really know what a human being is. That's the implication of the kind of position that he has taken. Expressions as woman and human are fuzzy concepts, thus claiming the inability to distinguish whether he or any other living thing is a woman or a man, or a human or a non-human. Thus he opens the door to new Nazi Holocaust and or communist purge. He claimed on various occasions, compare questions number 2 and 4 on Monday night, that there is real, objective wrong, moral wrong, yet he has no basis for making this claim. Given his atheistic position, it's in violent conflict with it. 26, he claimed that in torturing and or murdering 6 million Jews, the Nazis were guilty of violating no law at all. Question number 5, Monday night. He admitted by implication from number 26, the preceding point, that the Nazis did nothing worthy of punishment, that is, not even of guilt of violating any law, but I've explained to you the higher law concept. 28, he claimed the judges at Nuremberg could not have been justified in concluding that the Nazis were guilty of real objective moral wrong, that they were not guilty of real objective moral wrong, thus contradicting his answer to question number 5 explained in blunder number 26 on the same night. All right. Now, in the final 3 minutes of my speech, I want to turn to charts number 84, M1, M2, and M3. Now, I'm sure that you recognize, in contrast to Dr. Matson's viewpoint, that these charts are not confusing, but rather are enlightening. They show you, help you to follow what I'm saying, and it shows you that I'm giving you a precise logical argument. Now, if I were just going to talk in generalities about history, well, I wouldn't want any charts either. All right, the reply to Dr. Matson's argument in regard to God and punishment. First, if the function of the human body, now you remember what he said about this, that when you die, there can be no punishment after death, because when you die, your body goes to the dust, and then if you were reassembled, you'd have to be a different person. But now remember, he says there's nothing to him but the physical matter. That's all there is. There's no spirit, no soul. If the function of the human body, in particular the central nervous system, implies a human being's consciousness, secondly, and if a human being's consciousness implies a human being's identity, then it follows that the function of the human body implies a human being's identity. Argument form, hypothetical syllogism. Note, Matson has admitted the above premises by admitting an omnipotent God could create a human being out of nothing, reassemble and resurrect that same body out of its original elements, identify and consciousness is nothing more than the functioning of the human body. Therefore, Matson has admitted that God could resurrect the same identity. That's an admission that he could resurrect the same identity, and I have given it. Dr. Matson, that chart number is 84M1, if you'd like to take it and take it up item by item. All right, now Matson's dilemma 82. It is the case that if a person's identity while living is determined by the functions of his body, then it is the case that R, the reassembled body, constitutes the identical human being. And it is the case that not F, if it is false that a person's identity while living is determined by the functions of his body, then it is the case that T, a man's identity, transcends the functions of his body. In the second place, we have either F or not F. That's clear according to the law of excluded middle. However much Dr. Matson doesn't seem to like the law of excluded middle. You know, David Hume, a well-known philosopher, said, no man turns against reason until reason turns against him. In their classroom, these philosophers, and I'm one, but these philosophers are constantly talking about religious people not being rational. They say all they do is just be subjective. They just tell about your feeling. But when they get in debate, what do? They turn against the law of excluded middle, the law of contradiction, and so on. Therefore, it follows either R or T. I have therefore proved it. Now notice 84 in 3, B1 or B2. Let B1 be the present living body of Wallace Matson, which he identifies as himself. The body, the pure physical body, that's all, nothing more. 2, let B2 be the reconstructed body, which in every respect identical with B1, which Wallace I. Matson admits God could make, if indeed God existed. But if B2 does not contain the identity of Wallace Matson, as he has argued, then this identity is something distinct from either B1 or B2. Christians call such an entity which is transcendent of the body, the soul. Thank you. That's pretty good time.
To devote my final 20-minute period to what used to be called a confession. In so doing, I shall be violating the laws of debate, but I stand already convicted of violating so many objective laws that one more is not going to make much difference. Some of you have asked me, but if you're an atheist, how can you bear to live without any purpose in life, any goal but extinction, nothing making any difference in the end? I'll try to answer that question. To do so, I'll have to talk about myself. I was born in Oregon, but after my father's death when I was 3, my mother took me, her only child, to Fresno. Except for a few years with a stepfather with whom I didn't get on, she and my grandmother raised me. I was poor at games and good at school subjects, a combination very close to what geneticists call a lethal mutation. It was made even worse by my being put a grade and a half ahead in school so that I was supposed to play baseball with boys of 1 or 2 years advantage in physical development. I was a lonely and unhappy child, spending most of my time off in a corner wrapped up in a book. Fresno had no symphony, no art gallery, no theater, but it did have a public library, an institution that I think is a much better educator than a public school. I read voraciously. I especially remember, first of all, Mark Twain, whose books I owned. They were almost the only inheritance I had from my father, but a rich inheritance. Then Voltaire's Candide. And I devoured every issue of the Popular Mechanics. And I discovered the American Mercury and H.L. Mencken. And Percival Lowell's book on the canals of Mars, which made me want to be an astronomer. And Andrew White's monumental history of the warfare between science and theology in Christendom. I had a proper Christian education, including compulsory Sunday school. But very early, I think I was only about 9, I formulated for myself the rationalist view that I've been expressing here. It grieved my mother when she found out about it, and it still does, and I'm sorry for that, but I feel no guilt about it. Just when I was starting high school, we moved to Sacramento, where I had the great good fortune to meet for the first time boys of my age who shared my interests. I don't mean atheistic ones. I don't remember our ever talking about religion at all. I mean just general intellectual and boyish ones. I had somebody to talk to and play with. I made friendships that last to this day, though I was in Sacramento for less than a year before again moving, this time to San Francisco. High school for me was a joy, and college sheer heaven. And by becoming a professor, I've been able to stay in it all my life. I am amazed when I think of the luck I've had, and the many calamities I no doubt had coming to me, but which I somehow escaped. I've been blessed with good health. A wonderful woman showed up in one of my classes when I first began to teach philosophy and consented to marry me after the final examination. We have celebrated our 25th anniversary early this year. She has never ceased to love me, though I have been very difficult to live with, and I have always loved her, and increasing success, not to cause her pain. I have numerous defects, chief of which, in my opinion, are laziness and poorly controlled temper. In consequence, I have not accomplished very much of what I think I could have done if I had worked harder. And my temper has led to all kinds of unpleasantness for myself and those who love me. But I have not given up the struggle against them, and activities like those of this week are very good exercises in both respects. My wife and I have 2 sons who, despite my parental shortcomings, have grown into fine young men. At least we think so, though Dr. Warren might disagree, inasmuch one of them is living in sin with a beautiful and beautiful-souled young woman whom he loves, and whom my wife and I love as if she were our own daughter. If they freely choose someday to have a few words mumbled over them by a justice of the peace or even a preacher, that will be fine with us. It will be fine if they don't. I have friends. Some of them are homosexual. It grieves me that I can say no more about them. Not that I care what anyone might think of me, but because I might inadvertently blow their cover and subject them to the persecution which, despite what you may have heard, exists even in my part of the world and shows every sign of becoming more virulent, to the joy of Dr. Warren and the angels in his heaven. I delight in the contemplation of nature. In the first place, all of it, without exception, is aesthetically beautiful to my eye. I have never seen a landscape in mountains or desert or anywhere that I didn't find grand, nor an animal or a plant that was ugly, even the spider, when you can conquer your prejudice. There is ugliness aplenty in the world, but it is all man-made. I have walked around Tampa, in the downtown and the area to the northeast to Ybor City, and it is an abomination of desolation. About average for an American city, I think. In the second place, it is delight to me to learn about nature. The spider and the warthog become more beautiful, not less, the more I know about their structures, habits, affiliations in the great evolutionary tree, and so on. Some people seem to think that when you understand what makes something tick, it drains all the value out of it. It's then nothing but a hunk of matter, a mere machine, etc. I simply don't understand their attitude. My wife is a hunk of organized matter, and she is infinitely valuable to me, and I don't find the slightest clash between these facts. I value knowledge. I think knowing how things are is one of what I'll recklessly call the absolute values, valuable always and in all circumstances. If I hadn't experienced it, I doubt if I could believe that there are people who go to great lengths to conceal the truth about the world from themselves and from others. My delight in knowledge even goes to the extent that I like to read history books. The record of the crimes and follies of mankind, according to the great historian Gibbon. If this shows some kind of delight in horror in me, well, that's another defect. I delight in the arts, all of them, but above all, in music. When I listen to Bach's B minor Mass, or play, I am an amateur pianist and harpsichordist, when I play a piece by Chopin, often the tears literally come to my eyes. I am overcome by my awe that there have been men who created such grandeur. And no matter how many history books and newspapers I have just been reading, I am reassured in the certainty that it has, after all, been worthwhile to evolve man. And it would be a pity if he killed himself off. And being a philosopher, or trying to be, I reflect that the appalling amount of evil there is in the world is, as Spinoza teaches, not anything positive, but simply a lack, and primarily a lack of knowledge, as I tried to show in considering the instance of Hitler. St. Paul teaches that the love of money is the root of all evil. I have to disagree. Evil has many roots, no doubt including economic ones. But the taproot is ignorance. And the worst ignorance of all, the ignorance that Socrates called attention to. Not even knowing that you don't know, but persuading yourself that you have the truth by the tail and have a God-given right, duty, to ram it down everybody else's throat. As a university professor, it is my duty to disseminate knowledge, to present it, that is, to take it or leave it, and to add to its stock. This I believe to be a worthy enterprise. It gives my life all the direction and goals it needs, as far as I can see. And I will fight you, Dr. Warren, if you try to take it away with your crusade to cleanse the state universities. But how can you face death if you believe it's nothing but extinction people ask. I don't know. I just do. A psychological quirk, perhaps. I hope I don't die very soon, because I enjoy being in this wonderful world. And there's so much more I want to do. I want to run the marathon someday. At my advanced age, I have taken up running and found it had all the virtues claimed for it. Plus, in my liberation from the feeling I've had since childhood that I could never be good at anything physical. I'd like to learn to play the harpsichord as well as Bill Buckley does, or I'd like to write a novel. It would be great to make it to 98 in full possession of my faculties, like Bertrand Russell. But I don't fear extinction. I just don't. Why should I? Maybe one reason, I'm speculating here or conjecturing, maybe one reason is that, in my opinion, the country is going to hell in a bucket. You must pardon the expression. I think we had a good thing going, but we blew it. It makes me sad to think of what it may be like when my boys are as old as I am now. But suppose you're wrong, and God does exist, and you have an immortal soul after all. I have given thought to this possibility. I've tried to explain my reasons for not believing that there is a personal source of nature and man. But if there is, what a wonderful guy he or she or it must be, to be the first cause of all this glory, to have endowed matter with the potentiality of evolving into Beethoven. One thing I'm absolutely certain of is that if there is such a being, he couldn't care less about the fact that, unlike Dr. Warren, I have masturbated, and indeed more than once, and even without repenting and calling for forgiveness. No, the creator of the earth and the starry heavens could by no possibility be also the creator of so squalid a place as hell. That, to my eyes, has all the marks of being an exclusively human product. Tampa compared to the Everglades. No attendant to the Chamber of Commerce. Recently, I've had occasion to reread the Gospels. I find much of value in the Gospel. I reread two beautiful texts that have always greatly impressed me. One is Jesus' saying that the Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. The other is the story of the woman taken in adultery. I believe that these have been neglected by you, Dr. Warren, and that you might well meditate on them with great spiritual profit. But I try to live by secular as well. I may not always succeed, but at least I try. For instance, here are a couple from the novel Tristram Shandy by Lawrence Sterne. The Reverend Lawrence Sterne, I'm happy to emphasize. One place is where there has been a domestic mishap, as a result of which everyone is rushing about and shouting and accusing and demanding that steps be taken and so on. My Uncle Toby's advice, said Tristram, was to wipe it up and say no more about it. The other text is where a fly was buzzing around Uncle Toby's head and annoying him. Instead of swatting it, he carefully caught it in his hands, opened the window and let it out, saying, "Little fly, surely the world is big enough for me and thee." I have given you a glimpse into my lifestyle. I think it expresses my potential tolerably well. At any rate, I am a happy man. I'm not urging anyone else to adopt my lifestyle. It wouldn't fit my good friend Dr. Warren at all. And he, too, is a happy man doing his thing, expressing his potential. Is it not written, "In my Father's house are many mansions"? I thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here for my final 5 minutes of this discussion. I believe this is one of the most curious speeches to respond to that I've ever had in my experience of public discussion. And while I do want to say this in kindness because I do love Dr. Matson, I care about him very deeply and sincerely. I want him to have a happy life. I want him to have a happy eternity. And it is true that the speech he just given was out of order so far as the rules of debate are concerned, because it was new material and should not have been introduced at this point. I could not help but think, and this is a rather funny little story, and I don't mean any offense by it, but I think it fits the occasion. Herman Hickman, you remember the famous football coach, was once penalized for coaching from the sideline. He was penalized only 15 yards, and when reminded by someone that the penalty should have been 15, he told Hickman that his coaching wasn't worth 15 yards. And so I just say that this speech was really not worth objecting to, so far as its value in this debate is concerned. I am concerned about his life, or all the problems he may have had as a child, or all the problems even he may not have now. And I assure you, Dr. Matson, that I have not neglected the passages to which you referred. I try to do as the Apostle Paul did, to preach the whole counsel of God. I try to preach that every man ought to love every man on this earth, that if there's any answer to the racism that we find in the world, it's in the religion of Christ. To recognize that the gospel has the great purpose of drawing all men into one body, that we may all be one in Christ. No matter whether you're from Africa, Europe, China, South America, where. Paul makes this clear in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 13 to 16. And to intimate that we do not love those who live in adultery or in homosexuality, or even that we do not love those who are guilty of murder, is to simply and flagrantly misrepresent us. The fact that we point out that these things are sin, and that those who live in willful disobedience and who die in that condition will be lost, does not mean that we do not love them. It was the same Lord who said to the woman taken in adultery, "Go thy way and sin no more," who said in Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 and 14, "Enter ye in at the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leadeth unto destruction, and many are they that enter in thereby. But narrow is the gate and strait is the way that leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it." It was our same Lord who said, as recorded in Matthew chapter 25 and verse 46, regarding the great and awful day of the judgment, when every one of us shall be resurrected from the dead to stand before him to give an account for the deeds done in the body. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 10 and 11. And there the Lord Jesus Christ, who loved every person, even Wallace Matson, who was aware of his unhappy childhood, was aware of his problems even today, who loves him in spite of all that he said against him, and who would forgive him, even as he would have forgiven Judas. If Judas had come as did Peter, and in effect fallen down and said, "Oh Lord, forgive me, I know I've been wrong," our Lord would have been as willing to put his arm around Judas in loving kindness and forgiveness as he was Peter. He denied him, Judas betrayed him, but Peter repented. And whose sermon do we have recorded in the 2nd chapter of Acts but that of Peter? Dr. Matson, that's Christianity. We're brought together in one body to love each other because we love Christ. just as two ants are on a wheel, walking around it. As they begin to walk down the spokes, coming nearer to the hub, they're coming nearer to each other. There's no way that two people can come nearer to Christ without coming nearer to each other. How deeply sorry I feel for every person who has rejected God, for every person who's rejected the gift of God, for every person who, in spite of the fact that Jesus said, "Come unto me, all ye that labor are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and you shall find rest in your soul." I've had a great deal of tragedy happen in my life, but I'm not here to tell you about me, but about him who died for you, that you might live forever.
Now let me admit that I had some misgivings about coming here. My wife tried to persuade me to call it off. She said, "You go preaching atheism in the Bible Belt, and some nut is going to take a poke at you for Jesus' sake." And I was afraid she might have a point, and I am a cowardly type. Nevertheless, I felt that the invitation had put me in a put up or shut up position. So I said, "Oh, what the hell," again, you should pardon the expression. Life is uncertain everywhere. How groundless were my apprehensions. Nowhere have I ever had a more courteous reception, kinder or more hospitable treatment. Never did I dream that an audience, a large one like this, many members of which must have been pained and shocked by much that I said, could maintain such perfect decorum. The courtesy, friendliness, and serious interest of the many who have asked me questions after the debates have also been extremely impressive. I am told that many of you are praying for my soul. Please be assured that I greatly appreciate the goodwill thus expressed. It would be a falsehood, or at least an exaggeration, if I said I had enjoyed every minute of it. But on the whole, it has been a great time for me. I hope your expectations of me, whatever they may have been, have found at least partial fulfillment. I have said some rather bitter things about religion. But of course, just as there is no Spanish language, only Spanish speakers, and no mankind, only Tom, Dick, and Jane, so also there is no such thing as religion, only individual believers and practitioners. To the members of the Church of Christ here, let me say, I don't hold with your beliefs, but your practice is beautiful as I have seen it. I can do no more than endorse Anthony Flue's eloquent remarks contrasting your ferocious eschatology and your personal kindness and gentleness. If there is inconsistency there, it is blessed inconsistency. And now farewell.
They have restricted you from doing that throughout the week in view of keeping down emotionalism, but I'm going to encourage it now. I think the audience does appreciate Dr. Matson, his scholarship, his wisdom, his training, his ability. And as we started out in this series, we've stated and have continued to state it, we do not believe that there is a man anywhere in our nation that has the training and the ability to uphold the position which he has espoused that will be superior to Dr. Matson. We appreciate this scholarship. We appreciate his person. We differ with him, of course, or we would not be here. But I want the audience to express their appreciation both to Dr. Matson and to Dr. Warren. And you know how we feel about Dr. Warren. that can uphold the position of theism as effectively and forcefully as has he. If you'd like to express your appreciation by saying so with the hand expression, I think it's in order. Then the preacher being involved in the thinking and the putting together the debate and meditating over what would be done and our objective and our purpose. And I believe I can speak for the elders of the church and everyone who's had a part in it, both the local congregation there and other churches who have sent contribution, those who have come. We as people are concerned with one thing, be it on this issue or whatever, and that is that truth be the thing that we look to and that we want. That's been the objective of these debates each evening. And I know I've profited tremendously more than words could express. And I'm deeply grateful for the men who've come, for you who've made it possible, and for those of you who have encouraged us by being here and assisting in any way that you could to make it a reality. You're now dismissed. Dr. Matson.